Good evening to everybody, and welcome here. Very happy to be with you all, and happy to see some new faces and some faces that I got to see last week. I'm Eve Ekman. Really looking forward to both leading you in meditation and engaging in a discussion and talk about emotions and impermanence this evening. How many of you here often come to this Monday night sitting? Okay. So I'm not Jean and I'm not Matthew, but very happy to fill in for them. And a lot of what I'll be talking about tonight, which is different from last week, is really the core foundation of the teachings I'm most interested in, and about how we understand and explore our emotional life, develop emotional awareness, and have some choice every day in our emotional experiences. And it's a huge topic. Not only in the Buddhist psychology, but also in Western psychology. So tonight we're going to really be looking through the keyhole at the vast rooms beyond. We're just going to take a little look at emotion, a little look at both the contrasts and overlaps of the Buddhist psychological perspective and the Western science of emotion in our everyday life. The meditation that I'm going to lead is a practice that's based from a teacher named Sakni Rinpoche. So he's a Tibetan teacher. He's a very charismatic and hilarious gentleman and teaches kind of all around the world these days. I've had the good fortune of sitting with him and really learned a lot from his approach to emotion. And one of his practices is called the handshake practice. And essentially the handshake practice suggests that we familiarize ourselves with our experience of our emotions in our body. And we don't do so with a kind of bear hug embrace that might suffocate them. And we don't do so by pushing them away and trying to ignore them. But we meet them with a handshake, recognize them, give them the space to unfold. And this practice we can do kind of in an open awareness. So we could sit here and wait till something comes up, handshake whatever emotion arises, and let it be at that. But the practice I'm going to guide us in is what's called a retrospective awareness. So we are going to go back in time to 1,000,000 years ago when you woke up this morning and follow through up until this moment when you arrived here. We're going to do so with two very specific goals, and I'll give you instruction but also give you space to practice on your own. But the instruction is to both pay attention to your day as we kind of follow through from its beginning, as though you were watching it. So observing almost from the outside what you did when you woke up, what was going on, but on the same lens or the same kind of, if you imagine a split screen, there's also what you felt in your body. So as you're moving through your day, as different events arise, are you aware of a significant feeling in your body, especially when you encounter something that might give rise to an emotion? And this could be something as simple as, in my case, whenever I ride my bike and some car pulls out in front of me, there's a jolt of either frustration or fear or whatever it is, and I feel it in my body. And throughout our day, we have these many instances where we actually can experience emotion in our body. And so what we'll be doing this evening in the handshake practice, going through our day, paying attention to how it feels to experience these emotions throughout the day. Any questions before we begin this practice? Great. So I think that this is hitting something. I'm going to try and get it to a little bit of a better position. Hair and makeup called in sick. So did audio. So sorry, guys. Okay, can you hear me pretty well still? Okay. So one thing I'd really like to begin with, I know that people here have a various range of expertise, but I'd like to give you some simple instructions of your posture. So I'm going to suggest that you find a really solid base as the first thing you do. If you're sitting, it just means you feel that you're in a comfortable position where you won't need to move too much. You're really kind of rooted firmly. And I would invite you to have your hands either resting gently on your thighs or folded in your lap, just one into another. Giving them somewhere to be, and again, just helping anchor that solid base into your body. I'm going to also ask that you really make sure there's some spaciousness between your shoulders, that your chest is open. It may help to kind of inhale and draw your shoulders to your ears, and exhale and just release down your back. And notice how open your chest is. It gives you some ease of breath. I'm going to also ask that you pay attention that your spine is upright, like a column or like a whole stack of coins. And with our spine this way, it gives us a little bit of the vigilance and discipline that at this late hour in the day, we're not as likely to fall into a kind of stupor or fatigue and sleep. And also, I want you to check in that your mouth is relaxed. You're not clenching your jaw. You're not pursing your lips. You don't have to have your mouth hang open, but just to make sure that there's just some ease there. Make sure your head is resting evenly on your neck, that your chin isn't stooping forward, and that the back of your head isn't tilting back. This will help you also avoid either excitation or any laxity in your thoughts. And have your eyes just gently closed. But if there's too much going on and that feels to be a challenge, just have them softly focused in front of you. We begin by settling our breath, settling into our body. Just paying attention to the felt sensations of our breathing body sitting here in this chair. Noticing how our shoulders slightly rise as we inhale. Noticing as our abdomen rises through our inhale. And allowing our attention to relax and release through our exhale. So inhale, noticing these sensations. And exhale, releasing and relaxing that attention. And when the thoughts or memories, images, sensations, or sounds capture our attention, we just gently relax and release and return once again to just noticing our breath through its inhale and then relaxing our attention through the exhale. And for just a couple more minutes, we're going to follow our breath. We're going to help create that solid base by allowing our body to relax, settling our speech, and settling our mind. Just resting in the awareness of our breathing body. Noticing if we're carrying any tension on our forehead or brow, and just relaxing and releasing around our eye sockets, cheekbone and jaw, relaxing around our lips and nostril, relaxing even our tongue resting in our mouth. And through our next breaths, just letting any excess tension just slip away. And before we shift into the main part of this practice, I want you to bring to mind your aspiration or intention for being here tonight. By placing our intention and motivation behind this practice, we give it just a little extra push. Really helping us inspire ourselves. And with our intention set, we begin by rewinding through our memory to the first moment when we remember waking up. This could have been sometime in the night, maybe with a sound or a thought or a worry. Or it could have been early in the morning. And just bringing to mind with as much detail as possible, what was the first thing that you thought or that you felt when you woke up this morning? And again, imagining seeing the scene from the outside and also feeling the experience. And then moving ahead to the next things that we did. Maybe showering, getting food, or having to run immediately out the door. Talking with a loved one, or maybe even a morning practice. And again, we practice this observation, remembering what happened, but not falling into the scene, not becoming involved with thoughts projections or ideas about what was happening. Just watching it and remembering how it felt. If a strong sensation arises through this memory, simply bring your breath to it and observe and wait and watch for it to unfold, not forcing it to be another way, not trying to rationalize or change it, just letting it unfold and dropping into your body, dropping into those felt sensations and trying to disentangle it from any thoughts of why or how or what. And then moving ahead to maybe the second hour of our day. Remembering what you were seeing, who you were engaging with. And again, what were your thoughts? Were you even aware of having an emotion? Were you busy? Did you have some maybe laxity of thought, daydreaming? Once again, paying attention to any sensations in your body that may arise from these memories. And whatever we're feeling or not feeling, just settling into watching and observing sensations in the body, neutral or tight, potentially even joyful. Moving ahead in time a bit more to the midday. What were we doing then? Who was involved? How had things changed since the morning? Again, bringing to mind with detail the seen from the outside and the felt from the inside. And if you find yourself caught up reliving a conversation you were having, or trying to wish that maybe something had gone different, or reliving the way something had gone right, simply relax your attention and return to just an observing state. Again, just dropping into the felt sensation of being in your body and watching these memories. Then moving ahead to the afternoon. Maybe feeling a bit tired, or maybe just getting going. Again, bring to mind a scene, something that pops up. And think of what you could see around you. What was happening? And what, if anything, you were feeling about all that was going on? What were you thinking? Even if you were listening in conversation or writing an email, was there a tone, an emotional resonance beneath that? And again, just letting whatever sensation arise just unfold as it will in your body. You may notice if there's something tight, something more acute that you feel, that through just resting and observing, it may start to dissipate, may thin out. And just watching and waiting, and again, dropping into the body. Moving ahead in time once more, to maybe an hour or two before you arrived here. Thinking of what you were doing, maybe the travel you had to make to get here, tasks you had to finish, getting food, or in whatever other way taking care. Once again, watching and observing the scene and reflecting on the felt. And just noticing once again what it feels like to be in your body, remembering these scenes and reflecting on the day. Allowing your breath to naturally flow in and out. Helping move these memories and images through. And fast forward once again to walking in the door here. Maybe for your first time, maybe over 100 times. Can you recall how it felt, what you were thinking right when you entered? Maybe looked around to see someone you knew, trying to decide where to sit. Again, observing and feeling. And without preference, just being open to whatever feelings arise, whatever memories we have about this experience. And then we move ahead into this present moment. Really and truly settling in to being here. Checking in and observing how it feels in your body right now. Exploring your inner climate. And as we settle into this present moment, again, allowing ourselves to truly drop into our bodies. Being at home in the place where we always truly are at home. And for these next couple minutes, we'll be sitting here just practicing an open awareness. Instead of trying to push our thoughts away, we open ourselves up to whatever arises. But just like the rest of our day, we observe these thoughts. We watch them. And we pay attention especially to whether or not we get a felt sensation in our body, whether there's an emotional charge connected. And once we feel that emotional charge or sensation, we simply rest and relax, letting go of whatever that thought wants to tell us, and just simply dropping into our body. We watch, and we wait, and we drop. If we notice we become lost in one of our thoughts, again, we simply relax, release, and return again to this observing space, this kind of sky-like mind, watching the clouds of our thoughts pass by. Noticing if a sensation arises, and when it does, for a moment dropping away from the thoughts and really focusing in on the body. And before we bring this practice to a close, we release our effort, release our thoughts, and just take 3 very slow breaths through our inhale, and relaxing and releasing through our exhale. So before we take a brief break, questions on that practice? Or any thoughts or reflections? Yeah.
Is that just supposed to try to get you to kind of I guess, maybe repackage some of the things that you experienced today, or maybe rethink some of the things that happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think that can happen, but the idea is really to, there's 2 parts of the purpose of the practice. One is developing your attentional stability. So this happened, that happened, next thing, without trying to get too lost in the, oh, I wish I could have done that, or I really liked what that person was doing, or whatever else, just kind of trying to keep in mind. So that's like an attentional stability practice, a mind training. And then also kind of really arriving here. Because we come and this happened and then the next thing, okay, now I'm here. Meditate, right? So to give us an opportunity to kind of look through and observe so that we can arrive here more fully. Yeah. Okay. Well, after we're going to take a brief break and then have a Dharma talk in which I'm looking forward to hearing more of your thoughts and ideas. So as I mentioned, there's a lot that I would like to talk with you about for about the next 2 weeks or maybe 2 months about emotion. Actually, I teach a course that's called Cultivating Emotional Balance, and it will be offered here in March. So there's a little plug. When I teach the teacher training for that, so when I'm training other people to teach Cultivating Emotional Balance, we spend 2 full weeks in residential retreat teaching emotion. And then we spend 3 weeks in silent retreat trying to just kind of deal with that. No, I mean, there's other things happening as well. But suffice to say, there's a lot when I talk about emotion, and I really tried to find a couple key points that I hope will get you inspired and excited and motivated to consider emotion. We're going to look at kind of a description of why this handshake practice, right? Why kind of familiarize yourself with this experience of emotion. And to do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the basic physiology of emotion. My background or my current work or position is I'm a contemplative scientist, meaning I study Eastern approaches to meditation and emotion regulation through health psychology. And I'm at UCSF at the ATS Center. And there I teach a lot of really brief meditation courses on how to manage stress in order, hopefully, to avoid burnout. And as folks who were here last week know, that's specifically my area of interest when working with people in human service settings, so hospitals and schools, criminal justice and first responders. But emotions being universal, this is good for all of us. So I'm going to talk a little about the physiology of emotion. I'm going to talk about how we understand emotions in terms of which ones we prefer to have, which ones we'd like to avoid. And I'm going to talk about the subtle body. And this handshake practice was really looking at the subtle body, or the place between our mind and our physical body where it's believed that our emotions abide. And then I'm going to talk about the wisdom of impermanence and interdependence of emotions. And on each of these topics, I'm going to give you a little bit of background from the Buddhist psychological point of view and also from the Western scientific point of view. I think they're a really nice complement to one another, and both give you different ways conceptually to consider this, as well as different tools that you can apply. Because of the work I do, I'm really interested in ways that you can apply this right now, tonight, and tomorrow, and without having to feel that your whole life needs to change. Just like little ways or little considerations, little turnings of the mind. So I wanted to start with an interesting quote because I was doing some reading over the weekend and preparing for this talk, and there was a passage about the Buddha's advice on how we manage disturbing emotions. So in a lot of the Buddhist literature, and specifically I'm familiar more with the Tibetan side, they talk about disturbing emotions. And this is, a lot of the practices are aimed to help us manage these disturbing emotions. And the Buddha's advice is, see them as poisons and abandon them. Got it? Going home? We're good? And I was like, cool, great. That's incredibly hard to do. But then I sat with it a while and I was like, okay, what does this really mean? Indeed, that kind of poison sounds pretty strong. But I actually think to be able to see or identify something as caustic, as toxic, as something we don't want, is incredibly powerful, right? The difference between thinking something is a source of our enjoyment, of maybe ease or freedom, a refuge, or thinking something is possibly toxic or poisonous or bad for us, the exact same thing can have a very different response. Of course, with any kind of substance, that can be the case. With a person, with our job. And so I was like, okay, see it as poison. So recognize first that these disturbing emotions have such a strong effect. And then how do we see them? That's a really hard thing to do. So I'm hoping that some of you had the experience through that practice of realizing that there were a lot more things that occurred during your day than you might have been aware of if I just said, how was your day when we showed up? Instead of spending 45 minutes passing through the felt experience of those emotions and kind of scanning for what happened. So even in that first part of see them as poisons, we have to kind of turn our mind towards recognizing how some emotions can truly disturb us, and we have to be able to identify them, even though they're happening. So then the second part, and abandon them. Maybe even harder. So seeing them, changing our mind, and abandoning them. That one, I think, takes a bit more time. And what I know about most people's struggles with emotions they'd rather not feel, or ways they'd rather not act in response to their emotion, is that you have a lot of ability ahead of time to kind of prepare, hopefully prevent, maybe avoid those instances in which those difficult emotions arise. And then afterwards, you have a lot of time to reflect and consider, maybe plan for next time. But when we're in the grip of that emotion, it's very hard to abandon it. And I think we really have to work hard on our preparation and on our response afterward. And so that's my interpretation of abandon. I can't see us completely being rid of the disturbing emotions we experience. Now, when Buddhist psychology talks about emotion, they're talking about 3 root causes of disturbing emotion. These are anger, craving, and ignorance. So with anger, it's like this aversion towards, I just don't want that, get that away from me, very strong feeling, right? And with craving, it's the exact opposite. I just need more and just give it to me, right? But then ignorance, it's not necessarily what we think of when we think of an emotion. It's more like a cognitive state, a confusion or a delusion. But it's a way that it distorts and prevents us from seeing reality as it is. So interestingly, this is a real divide from the Western psychological approach of the definition of emotion. So from the Western psychological approach, there are discrete experiences of emotion. Anger is one of them, enjoyment, but craving per se, not so much. And ignorance is considered a cognitive state. And I think the difference here can be understood in when Buddhist psychology is talking about anger, craving, and ignorance, these are called mental habits. In fact, the word emotion doesn't exist. And it's kind of been appropriated, and sometimes people think in not the best way, to mean mental habits. There's a big difference between a habit and a pattern and a discrete experience of emotion. So when we talk in a Western psychological point of view about emotion, we talk about something that triggers an event, we experience that event, which is our emotion, and we respond to that event. So, for example, if we feel anger, the anger is triggered by something, can feel it, and we act or react in some way, internally or externally. So my question for you is, how long do you guys think emotions last, generally? Yeah?
90 seconds.
90 seconds? Anybody else?
It can last a moment, it can last a few hours.
A moment or hours? Mm-hmm. Are there different emotions that last longer? Anyone have a feeling about that?
Lifetime.
Huh?
A lifetime.
A lifetime. Hopefully a good one. Anybody thoughts on that? Specific emotions which last longer, or?
The event of the emotion doesn't last for very long, but our reaction to that emotion can last for a very long time.
Yeah. Yeah, and in fact, when we look at the definition of emotion, again, from this Western scientific point of view, it's, a 25th of a second to 2 minutes. And that is a single episode of emotion, right? And yet, our re-triggering of that emotion creates these stories or these lifetimes in which it's perpetuated. And not always a bad thing, right? And in fact, I think a really important distinction is we don't want to get rid of emotions. That would actually make our lives dangerous and uninteresting, actually. Emotions have really important messages. They're signals to us. Something important is arising. And yet what really gets us into trouble is often when we can get a little locked into the experience, into that habit, into that pattern of thinking, right? So I often tell people, when we think about the more kind of natural flow of emotion, think about watching a toddler. And they're kind of running around, and they have their little play truck, and they're like so excited, and they're happy. And then, they drop it and it breaks, and they're so sad. And then something else happens, and they're so happy again. And they're not like, can't believe I dropped that truck, right? Like, it's fine. You let go, like momentary, like upset and moving on. And in fact, that's usually a pretty ideal way for us to respond. And yet we often really get caught and cling, and either, again, in that anger of, I just don't want to feel that, I really don't want that, or I want more of that, I want more of that, or just misinterpreting what's around us. So these habits and patterns are punctuated by these experiences of emotion throughout our day. I think that the Western psychological approach or scientific approach can really help us with identification. What is the emotion? Is it anger? And when it's anger, is it a frustration or is it rage? So, okay, what's the intensity of it? How long did it really last? How many times did I re-trigger it? And what was my response? Did I yell? Did I kind of brood and simmer all day till I could, kind of go home and watch something to numb me away? Or what was our response to those emotions? And I think an important part to bring up here is this distinction of when we evaluate our emotional experiences, instead of saying that there's negative emotions and positive emotions. There's ones that are bad and ones that are good. In fact, any emotion can be either constructive or destructive. So, for example, anger, often one which people have regrettable emotional episodes around. One word in anger can be 1,000 years of tears, I think is a Chinese proverb. So we have this anger arise, and it might even be justified, right? Let's say something really simple. Can anybody give me an example of when they felt angry recently? Low level, either frustration. Yeah, let's keep it low level. Something like frustrating.
Cut off in traffic.
Cut off in traffic. Yeah. All the time. And actually, whenever I ask for example, that's the number one. And it's interesting, it goes very close to our evolutionary trigger for anger, which is being thwarted in our pursuit of our goal. Right? So, and traffic's like, you're like in my way to my thing, right? And yet, like with being cut off in traffic, our anger about it in no way helps us move the obstacle of the goal. Even if we lean on the horn really good, it doesn't actually make people move, right? Like, ever. And it's interesting, so that, like, getting angry, getting, like, upset in traffic and, like, totally losing it and maybe yelling, I think you could consider that a destructive response to anger. But when you look at, okay, getting upset in traffic and you're like, I hate this feeling, I feel really frustrated. Sometimes it's out of our control, of course, with traffic, and sometimes it's like, I really need to not put myself in this situation. Like, I got to plan less in my life, or I have to find ways to not drive. Like, can I carpool? Like, there's ways in which we can have a constructive response. Like, I just need to breathe, I need to relax. Some meditation teachers, again, the traffic thing comes up so much. I've heard a lot of Dharma talks that address it. And sometimes you're supposed to wish everyone around you happiness and joy, some compassionate, like, heart sutra to everybody around you. Totally worth a try. I actually do that on Muni a lot. I might have mentioned that last week because you're like, oh, everyone, you all are in my way. And what's interesting about anger, it's a very narrowing emotion. It really creates this focus of them and me, right? Like, everyone else is traffic. I'm the one who needs to get somewhere. And so I think we can see, though, that an emotion like anger is also what motivates social justice and being able to move through what is kind of entrenchable circumstances. Sadness is important when we see injustice, but anger is actually very motivating. And there's a really useful energy that can be harnessed that way. So I think when we think of emotions, it's really worthwhile to consider that anything can be constructive or destructive, and that has to do with our response, not to the actual experience of the emotion. So now I wanted to move on a little to thinking about the subtle body. So when we were reflecting on and considering our day, were you guys able to feel something in your body? Did sometimes things arise? Can anybody give me an example they'd be willing to share? Yes, please.
I had gotten a email on Friday that I was supposed to have done some work and I hadn't done it, and I was showing up at work on Monday. And when my boss said good morning, I just felt a tightness in my chest. At the end, oh shit.
I forgot.
Face the music here.
Yeah, yeah. And when you felt that and then rested with it, did it change at all in your body?
We had a brief conversation and everything just floated away. It wasn't a problem.
Great. And when you were remembering it and that came up again?
I didn't feel the exact same
Okay.
bodily feelings again.
Okay.
I remembered them.
You remembered them, but it didn't kind of potentiate.
But I didn't get that tightness in my chest.
That's good. Did anybody else have an experience where in remembering it, they felt it again?
Oh, well, mine was more in remembering it. I didn't really remember what I felt then, but I felt heat at the moment now.
Yeah.
Remember it then.
Yeah.
It was frustrating. It wasn't anger, it was just like a little annoyance and frustration and trying to be patient with someone
Yeah.
in the store or something.
Yeah.
And as I remembered, I was frustrated, I felt a little warm.
Yep. And then paying attention to it.
Yeah.
And also, there's an interesting thing. So, again, the Tibetan approach, and this is shared by a lot of Asian medicine approaches, including like acupuncture and qigong. There's this idea that there are these kind of, this is so outside my expertise, so I'm going to really go lightly on this. But there are all these pathways and channels in our body. They carry energy, right? And our subtle body is this way in which our kind of emotions are encoded in our physical experiences. And in my field, in health psychology, we have this term of how do our experiences of stress get under the skin? And stress, like many of you have heard me say this, you know it's like my favorite thing to say, but there is no difference between the over-arousal of emotion and stress. I think sometimes people think that stress is this kind of nebulous cloud that descends on us, but it's the same, absolutely the same autonomic nervous system response as feeling a high intensity emotion. Usually fear, sometimes anger, right? So we have that high intensity emotional response, and it actually contributes to our physical health. All of you, I'm sure, have heard this through, some news source, anything from NPR to maybe actually academic articles, but we see that kind of what scientists would not call subtle body, but that something in our stress, something in our over-arousal of emotions gets under our skin and affects things like our immunological functioning, basic functions of our organs, our heart and our lungs, and can have some pretty toxic effects. So we see that in the Tibetan approach, they would say these blockages in our energy, these stuck emotions. You see somewhat of a parallel here with this stress, this tightening, and this locked in of our body. So when we think about how do we help our emotions move through? How do we help kind of remove these blockages? There are these approaches, of course, like acupuncture. I'm sure many people in the room have tried and found some benefit. Qigong and movement, and also giving our space to these emotions, to letting them unfold in the way we just did. So one of the things we know about stress research and about emotional suppression is that when you push your emotions down, like something arises and you're like, oh, hell no, like moving on, right? It doesn't make them go away and actually often gives us a higher physiological response, meaning trying to suppress and completely avoid your emotions makes it the feeling of it in your body more. And potentially, the toxicness or the poisonousness of it even greater in your body. And I'm not saying this to freak you out. I'm saying this as an invitation to really kind of be glad and grateful that you're here, giving your mind a rest, doing these practices, and to reflect on your emotional experiences. So the difference between a suppression, meaning like, oh, get away, like I don't want to feel this emotion, and an observation. Okay, this emotion, I'm feeling this, I'm noticing it. I'm not going to react as strongly as in a way that I might regret, but I'm taking it into account. That's what that handshake practice prepares us to do, to familiarize ourselves with the felt sensation of emotion and watch it. What does it feel like, and can I watch it? Can I not get totally lost in its grip or hijacked by emotion, as is often said? Now, one thing I'd like to say about this subtle body is one of the teachings, again, from Sakni Rinpoche that I think is an incredibly powerful mantra or incredibly powerful way to consider is he talks about the way emotions get stored in our body and can really contribute to delusion and to our inability to see reality as it is. And when he says that when we're in an emotion that can feel really difficult, that feeling is very real, but it may not be true. So oftentimes our emotions are both real and true. Like we're in traffic, it's annoying. That's real, that's true, right? But one example that I think works well is for anyone who's ever had a difficult or broken relationship, whether that's with a parent or a partner, and that person maybe betrayed you, they let you down, maybe they abandoned you. And there you are with someone new. And they're not that same person. And yet in your body, you're like, oh my God. And literally there is this kind of tightening and this felt sensation, and we are re-triggered to an emotional experience. Feels so real. Like, do I want to do this again? Am I going to get hurt again? And if you examine it and you look behind it, you really have to question, is this true to these conditions? Is this person actually showing me that indeed they might repeat this pattern? I'm indeed in danger of having this exact same thing happen? Or is this a kind of imprint here in my subtle body? Has anyone had an experience like that before? Where you have the kind of embodied reaction and you're just, it's pretty overwhelming. And so I think, again, it's not that all of our emotional responses are not true. But I do think, especially if we have a strong emotional response, we can consider, okay, this is real, but what is this really, what is this lying on? What is this story here? What is underneath? And one of the things we do in the Cultivating Emotional Balance workshop is we look at what triggered our emotion from the outside. So encounter with our boss, instance in traffic. But we also look underneath. What might be the stories? What might be the kind of history or database that would lead to our emotional reaction? And really starting to kind of excavate and uncover if there are these real feelings without a true basis, and identifying them in a clearer way. I think doing this work over time of really that inquiry, that examination, can hopefully prepare us to not be in so many difficult emotional experiences, shedding more light, getting more clarity. I think it can be really hard, again, when we're in the grip of the emotion, to remember any of these things. Is this real and not true? Should I wait a moment? Can I take a breath? It's very hard to have access. And I think, one other thing with those subtle body experiences is they're so familiar to us often, these kind of entrenched experience of emotion, and getting unstuck from it is very hard. It feels personal. It feels like who we are. It can feel like our entire identity. And to get unstuck from those feelings, fortunately, kind of requires that you let go of that part of your identity, and that you really try to face things new, try to feel new and to be new, which is, abandon them, right? Part of the advice. And again, I'm not sure that we can do that. I think it's a nice aspiration to be like, I'm going to stop having these delusions. I'm going to stop having anger and craving tomorrow. I really salute you if that's your intention. But I actually think that really the only way to start on that path is to familiarize yourself with the felt experience of the emotion, familiarize yourself with these triggers, start to become aware. And there's one piece of other piece of knowledge. So in addition to kind of noticing our physiology, considering whether or not we can have a constructive or destructive response to our emotion, questioning if it's real and not true. Also, if we can keep in mind the impermanence of our emotional episodes and interdependence of them. So impermanence, there's messages of it all around us. Like last week, it was freezing cold in here. This week, it's really warm, right? Things are ever changing in the inside and outside world. And emotions, they just have this incredible way of making us feel that way that we feel in that moment is the entire reality of our existence, right? And it's not. And sometimes we wish it was, but often we can't see outside of it, right? And so to kind of have that, again, as part of our, our mindfulness of our emotions, or developing our emotional awareness, keeping in mind that idea that all of these emotions are fleeting. They're all going to come, they're all going to go, letting them be that way. Instead of often, especially I keep bringing up anger. Anger and fear are the two emotions people are most often struggling with. And I feel like I should pay more attention to fear, because personally I struggle way more with fear than anger. Fear is kind of like the silent, destructive emotion. Because when you're angry, everyone's like, they're angry. They got a problem, right? But when you're afraid and like you're anxious, like people aren't like, you're anxious. I mean, maybe if you're reaching like Woody Allen levels, but mostly it's like you alone at night, waking up, not sleeping, and being like, oh God, right? And it's something we deal with and cope with really on our own. And so I think in considering, like whenever you're feeling this anxiety or this anger, and it just is not, forget your subtle body, it's in your physical body, right? You're feeling it completely. And if you have just some hint, somewhere, this is going to pass. This is not going to be this way. It's going to change. It just can allow you so much ease. And can also, when that passes, let it be. Because I think with fear and anger, our tendency is to kind of validate the experience by re-triggering it, especially with anger. Like, we're mad that someone cut us off, and we're like, we want to like continue being, especially if we lay it on the horn. You're like, I can't believe that, all the way through to the next day, right? And like just kind of fueling our own fire. And interestingly, I think it's a very Western approach to be like, I know how we're going to deal with our emotions. We're going to think about it. And Shantideva has this great line, I think I said it last week, but thinking about your emotions is like throwing kerosene on the fire. Like especially when you're in the grip of them. Like right now, I'm talking about it and we're thinking about our emotions, but when you're feeling it, trying to kind of rationalize your way out of it usually doesn't help at all. It kind of just gets you farther into it. Or, let's say you feel anger, you express it, you go into regret, you go into shame, you go into all these ways in which we kind of overanalyze instead of just dropping into our body. And they're the only place we can truly transform those emotional experiences, just through release and through relaxation. And Western science and psychology definitely has a lot of options for how to deal with emotions at that under level of going to talk therapy, maybe even doing some behavioral training so we can hopefully avoid some of those more disruptive activities. But in terms of what to do in the moment, the reason you see kind of mindfulness on the cover of every magazine is that Western psychology is very stoked that there's another option, right? It's like, oh my God, this breathing thing works. And part of the reason it works is focusing on your breath is so unintuitive. It would be like focusing on your emotions, right? Like something that happens automatically that we don't pay attention to and we just let it roll. And so that practice of observation really helps us identify, recognize, and hopefully have some choice over our emotions. So if we can also, keep this wisdom practice, keep this insight practice, there's a lot of opportunity for us to have kind of transformation with our emotions. There's a lot more I want to say, but I have a whole month of March to do it. So I'd like to hear your questions and thoughts on these ideas. Yeah.
Actually, I've done a lot of work around anxiety because 2 years ago I was diagnosed with PTSD and found mindfulness at the same time, thankfully. And what I've noticed that's helpful to me that I was wondering if you could speak to is, not necessarily thinking about the emotion, but I've noticed that certain emotional states will trigger a very specific story. One of my favorite ones, I'm a teacher, so one of my favorite ones to use is, I don't have enough time! That's like a huge one for me.
Yeah.
And I've learned to recognize when I'm telling that story. And it's kind of like a little red flag goes up, and I'm like, you need to breathe and chill out for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been really helpful, and I think, like, I wonder if there's, because it is good to recognize emotions in the body, but I think when you get wrapped up in it, especially with something that's like, clinical, when you get wrapped up in it and you're in it, what's made it easier for me to get out of it is to know the stories that my mind is telling. And I'm wondering if there's any practice around that.
Yeah, and I think, there's a big, thank you for sharing that, and I'm really glad you found things that are working for you. That's awesome. And I think for people, there's different approaches for different people. And I was listening to a Dharma talk the other night, and it was saying that there are so many different varieties of how you can apply, like, the multitude of practices, that literally every single person could have their own specific practice, right? Like, sadly, my knowledge is like, a pinky of that. So what I'll share is that I do think that some people have a much greater ease with this recognizing the story or narrative, that common trope, than with the felt experience in their body. That ability to feel your emotion in your body is called interoception, and there just are different variations. Some people just kind of have a very high interoceptive awareness, other people it's less so. And I think with the practices of the story, interestingly, some practices of meditation are really much more inquiry-based, right? And inquiry kind of sometimes lumped into vipassana, or looking inward. And when we're doing an inquiry practice, we really can start to, let's say, ideally, like, the last 10 minutes or so, we had this open awareness and we let anything come up. Ideally, you'd have this open awareness and maybe a story like that would come up for you, right? And you would really start to question the root of it. Not get involved in it, but be a little bit of questioning its ground. You're looking at it either as pleasant or unpleasant, looking at, is it true? Is it real? But sometimes, especially when we have these stories, a reflective writing practice is really helpful, because I think in meditation, unless we have like a lot of good guidance, it's so easy to just let the story take over, and we're like, no, but I'm getting to good stuff. But you're not really meditating anymore, right? You're kind of really caught up in a cognitive process, which might have a great deal of value, but might be one that's good to write. I would say if you can experience it and see it as it is, let it go in the practice, great. And then if you can have a writing or talking practice, would be really helpful. Thanks for the question. Other questions or comments? Yeah.
I'm not sure if this fits in exactly, but I had an experience of doing some meditation a while ago, where it was a lot of heart-opening meditations, and in them, I started being able to, my whole body would vibrate with the beating of my heart. It was huge. It was really pleasant and interesting. And so, fast forward over time, I have that sensation sometimes I don't. But the other day, I was wanting to, open that up again, get to that place again of trying to open my heart up more. I felt that, it had been closing down. And as I'm doing this, I felt it coming. I was, having this experience again. And then someone who I'm in conflict with, or had been in conflict with, drifted through my mind. And it was like my chest knitted together this wooden. It felt I wasn't feeling my heart anymore. I couldn't even feel it beat. Wow. But I just felt like a fibrous wooden type.
Wow.
It was really pronounced and a little disturbing. And and I thought, well, I'll just relax into this and I'll get back to it. And I couldn't get back. It shut it down so severely, And so I don't really know what to do with that except to, it was, I don't know.
Yeah, I think, I think that response is a very, you definitely had the unbidden, unasked for emotional response of something just coming up. And I think there's a couple of things I'd like to say on that. One is just that, amazingly, we don't need the outside world to trigger our emotions at all. And we get plenty of, anyone who's been on a silent retreat where nothing's happening, you're like, where is all this material coming from? You know, like there's a lot, and when that stuff creeps in, we're not necessarily asking for it. Like, where does it come from? But it's there. Like it bubbles up to the surface, right? And can trigger an emotion just as real if that person had walked in the room. You know, it is like physiologically speaking, a full arousal of that emotion. And someone last week was asking about compassion practices for others. And I think the heart-opening practices, whether it's compassion or loving kindness or empathetic joy or equanimity, I think we start with people who are easy to us, then ourselves, which may be not as easy to us, mostly. And then those people like we have great conflict with, advanced practice, you know? And I think we try it in like little bits. And we try, sometimes when I've gone through conflict with people, I'm determined to like compassion them out of my heart. And I think I'm doing really good. And then the thought of them slips in outside of my practice, and I'm like, oh, okay. It's like, you know, I'm acting, but I'm not really feeling it. And so I feel compassion for myself that I'm still so caught in that. So if you can't get to them, you can still get to you. So that's what I suggest. Yeah. More questions? Yeah.
For me, I have I was saying something earlier, like I'm very, at least I feel very aware of the various physical sensations and kind of emotional flow charts of like every possible flavor of feeling shitty. Like I've got a million synonyms for unhappy. And feeling, so when those kind of things happen, I can be like, okay, so this is what's going on, this is what I'm feeling it, it's heat, fear, pressure there, whatever. When I'm feeling, even the way I'm talking about it, I feel like when I'm feeling good, when I almost want to just say when I'm not feeling bad, I don't notice really what's happening. It's not like I feel great, I just don't feel awful. And I mean, I got a lot of practice with feeling shitty. So in moving forward, if things are going well, I'm a little, not necessarily caught up in it, but I don't know what I'm looking for. I'm not really sure what to look for as far as physiology. It's just kind of like, there's no pressure in your chest, so you're probably not angry. Like, you know what I mean?
It's a rule out.
Right, exactly. It's kind of like all of these terrible things are probably not happening.
Maybe
So for this current state, you're probably okay. It's just like cool, but I feel like there's more to be found there.
Totally.
I was just wondering what your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I totally know what you're talking about. And I actually remember
Being on retreat once and us doing like some sort of, I can't even remember what it was, some practice where we were inviting emotions, and someone raised their hand, they're like, I didn't really have anything to work with. And I was like, who are you? Like, what is your problem? And then the first time I went on retreat where something terrible wasn't happening in my life, I was like, whoa, okay. You know, like what am I looking for? Exactly that thing. And there's this amazing subtlety to like being okay, actually. And I just think it takes familiarization, and I really think it can be a rule out process where you're like, okay, so I'm not really anxious, not really angry. Okay, this is this okay. And this okay might be different from okay tomorrow, and that you just start looking for the subtlety. Because you might have an okay that's like bubbly, you might have an okay that's just kind of mellow, you might have an okay that there's a lot of thoughts, and you might have an okay that's more relaxed. And interestingly, there's 7 universal emotions that have universal signals on the face. And anger, fear, sadness, disgust, contempt, oh my God, this is a pop quiz for myself, surprise, and then enjoyment. Only one of those is okay, right? Pretty much. Surprise is like, neutral. Usually surprise, right? And then fear. So, but within the enjoyable emotions, there's actually the greatest range of like everything from relief to pride, right? So there's actually a lot of variability even within that one emotion. And I just think, especially because we're evolutionarily predisposed to pay attention to things that are threatening to us, like fear, sadness, and anger. It takes some familiarization to get used to the vanilla of okay. But I'm happy to hear you're exploring it. So thanks for the question. Yeah. One more question we have time for? Yeah.
So you spoke about suppressing emotions. So what's the distinction between suppressing your emotions and taking a deep breath and trying to get a hold of yourself? I'm just confused by that.
Totally great question and confusing. So, how much do I try to confuse you to unconfuse you? So in the emotion regulation literature, there's total suppression, there's effective suppression, and then there's reappraisal, and then just feeling it. So total suppression is the minute, and so I work a lot with folks in training in hospitals, right? So let's say you go in to see your patient, and you can see that they look pretty bad, like maybe beat up or otherwise, and they start telling you this terrible story about they feel unsafe at home. And you are like, I'm not going to feel that. You're like, I'm going into this robot mode. Okay, information. That's total suppression, right? You're just really trying to avoid not just showing any expression, but feeling anything, right? And that is it's an unarticulated system. So when you're pressing that all down, it's not like, oh, I'm just not going to feel those bad things. You're not feeling anything. You're just pushing it. And then effective suppression would be feeling that, maybe even really feeling it, but masking it. So everything's great, good, and not even a really good strategy either, right? Because you're totally freaking out on the inside and just not showing it. Actually, maybe surprisingly or not, the research literature on police officers is that they'll be not stressed at all, totally good. But if you look at their physiology, it's right? Not allowed to, not okay to actually express emotions. And no strategies, so trying to suppress, but really feeling it. And then this reappraisal. Reappraisal is like observing. It's like what we were doing in the handshake practice. That emotion's arising, yeah, I feel it. I'm aware. I'm going to try to not act in a way that's unskillful or destructive. And that actually is the same physiological kind of signature in our body that just experiencing the emotion. When you're just with your friends and things are great, you're not like, do I show this? Do I not show this? Just our natural kind of feelings of emotion. Usually we apply these regulation techniques when we're in a work setting or something professional, or we're trying to, in some way, control or manage our emotions. Is that more clear? Cool. Sweet. So we're going to do a dedication of our practice, but before I'm going to say 25 words or less on Dharma. I always want to break out into "Oh Donna," that Richie Valens song, but I won't. And Dharma is generosity. Dharma is the generosity of you guys all coming here together to support each other in this practice, of all the people who are making this event possible, who are webcasting, all the volunteers, and the director here of just making the center happen. And the Dharma is the invitation to you to repay that in whatever way is possible for you guys. So if that's through helping out, through emailing, through financial support, that's what we call Dharma. That's what makes this all possible and allows us to be here experiencing this through generosity, which is so awesome. People say, oh, you only value it if you pay for it, and we're really kind of going against the grain in that. So that's my more than 25 words on Dharma. Okay. So I'm going to ask us again, come into a comfortable position. Again, considering our solid base and our hands either folded together or resting on our lap. Again, maybe lifting our shoulders up to our ears through an inhale and exhaling them down our back to give us spaciousness in the chest. Having our spine upright. Really resting our head evenly on our neck. Relaxing our mouth and our jaw. And just gently resting our eyes. And for a couple breaths, just settling back into our body, resting our mind, allowing our thoughts and any ideas or reflections we've had to just slip away for a moment. Just recalibrating into our sitting body, into an ease of breath. And then shifting our attention to our mind and to really considering anything that we may have practiced tonight, thought of or shared, and setting an intention that in some way this may be of benefit to others. We can bring some of these ideas of emotional awareness into our interactions with loved ones and friends, coworkers, and even strangers. Recognizing the incredibly interdependent nature of our emotions. We can set our intention to be a more constructive part of that intricate interworking. May we know balance. May we feel ease. May we not judge ourselves for our difficult emotional episodes. And may we have open hearts and open minds to allow all beings around us greater ease and greater peace. Thank you all very much. Have a really emotionally neutral evening after this.